You've heard the story many, many times. And you likely can remember what happens next. Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden. They're booted out. They're shown the door, never to return. They are to make their own way in life now that they have knowledge of good and evil, now that they can make choices. A tragedy has happened, and this is the biblical story about the greatest tragedy of humanity that echoes through our lives. Because you know what tragedy feels like, whether it's some small tragedy you've dealt with or some larger collective tragedy. People at home, perhaps you come from another nation, you know what worldwide tragedy can feel like. All of that sense of tragedy is just captured here in this moment that reminds us that to be human means to suffer. To be human means to be making our way in this wilderness, apart from the luxuries of a paradise where all our needs are met. And we have a couple depictions historically of Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden, this idea of God's power, an angel standing guarding the door. And you just imagine, how long did Adam and Eve just hang out just around the corner from that entrance to the Garden of Eden? If we imagine the story going forward, just wondering, will that angel go away? Maybe we can sneak back in there. Like so many of us, when we found ourselves expelled from whatever part of our lives was so comfortable and so great, whatever relationships we had that then were lost, and part of us is just hanging out around the corner thinking, well, maybe I can get back. Maybe I can get back into what was. And then after a while you realize, no, you can't. You've got to move forward. Here's a question for you. Adam and Eve, expelled from the garden, they now have knowledge of good and evil. God has said, well, you made some choices. Now your life will be full of choices. The question is, what was the first thing that Adam and Eve chose to do after being expelled from the garden? What's the first thing you would do after you lost your paradise, after you lost your innocence? Some of you will recognize this is a scene from a TV show Survivor. I don't know what season it is, but the story or the TV series about Survivor, you recall, is you take a bunch of people and you drop them off on an island, and they have to fend for themselves and learn to adapt. And the opening episode every year of Survivor is fascinating to me for one reason, because there's this point where everyone goes to their empty beach where there's nothing available to them, and they have to collectively make a decision. What's the first thing we do? Do we make our shelter? Is that the thing that's most important? Or do we collect water and make sure we have enough of that? Do we figure out how to start a fire? Is that the first thing we're going to do? Or what sometimes happens is there are some contestants who think, the first thing I'm going to do is just sit on the beach and take in all of this beauty. And they start to clash with the people who are like, let's get the shelter made before nightfall comes. And then you have other contestants, the first thing they want to do once they're on this beach is socialize. Like, I want to get to know who you are. I'm going to be living with you for the next month. Tell me about your lives. And they want to create relationships. And again, you have this clash of decision-making between those who would want fun and social time and those who are saying, let's deal with our basic needs. And that's part of the beauty of humanity under a microscope. But back to the question. What's the first thing Adam and Eve did? It's the same thing that the survivor folks did. The first thing that we do, it's a trick question, the first thing that we do, like Adam and Eve outside the garden, is we just continue to keep going. When tragedy strikes in our lives and we're faced with what do we do next, really the first thing we do is we keep going. When we have some hardship that we're facing, some great disappointment in our lives, the very first choice that we make is, let's just keep going. Like, are you thinking about your own moment in time where the rug was pulled out from beneath you? You wondered, can I even trust this world? What do I do now that my garden has expelled me? And obviously the first choice you made is just to keep going. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, I had no choice. I had to keep going. But yes, you do. And yes, you have made that choice. And that's part of this biblical story. The first thing that humanity did as it became aware of its suffering, its hardship, is it just kept going. And it continued to do that. And thank God, because that's why you're here today. Someone else before you kept going. Life will always bring a tragedy. If you live in Strathroy, longer than 5 years, longer than me, you know that tragedy always rolls through town. What year was the train derailment? Oh, you've forgotten it already. Yeah, because we kind of keep going. Or before I arrived, the other tragedy was the bombing in the taxi cab. Tragedy always rolls into our lives. When you get to be older, you know that. We've been battered, we've been bruised. We know that suffering happens. And when that happens, we have this choice. And the fundamental choice is, like Adam and Eve, just keep going. Just keep going. I know that doesn't sound so theologically deep, this lesson I want to pull out of our biblical story of the fall of Adam and Eve, but it may not sound deeply theological, but it is. It doesn't have to be rocket science. The Hebrew people, as they told the story of their beginnings, our collective beginnings of humanity, embedded in that story, you just keep going. You just keep going. You know how that feels. I've been, of course, reflecting for the past few weeks, privately and then with Hugh, following my father's death, on lessons I've learned from him in life, including his many years with AA. And of course, the most well-known part of AA, I think, publicly, is its use of the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer is so powerful because it is praying around what's happened in our biblical story today. It's praying around the idea that we're expelled from this garden, this paradise, this innocence, this naivety that we have. We've been pushed out of it, and we have to make a choice to keep going. And the prayer is about that choice. God, please, I pray to you, God, grant me the peace of mind to accept the train wrecks that I cannot change, the tragedies that I cannot change, the hardships that I cannot change. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And in this moment, it's the courage to keep going. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In this biblical story today, we're reminded that despite the hardship, there's one thing that we have power over, and that's our decision: just keep going. Just keep going. Now, as I was putting the sermon together, I couldn't help but thinking, there are people who, in this very moment, are wondering, is it even worth my keeping going? I could end the suffering by killing myself right now, is the thought that creeps into so many people's minds. And I'll stand here today and say, if you're thinking of killing yourself, just keep going. I know it's easy to say, but just whatever may have been lost for you in your difficult life, whatever chronic pain that you have and suffering that you have, I want you to have the courage to do this one thing: just keep going. Because that's the story of humanity, and it's deeply about God. We keep going because God is with us, even if it doesn't feel like it. My birthday is August 31st. Having a birthday on August 31st is one and the same time the greatest thing and the most difficult thing. Having a birthday on August 31st is like eating that fruit in the Garden of Eden and then waking up the next morning to September. Having a birthday on August 31st is always about celebrating all the great things about summer, and then the sadness. It all has to end. My life is like the Garden of Eden. Right now, we're in the middle of September, okay? And you know the pull that happens in September. Your kids are back to school, your grandkids are back to school, the doctors are back from holidays. There's a million things that we must now do. And this, I think, is one of the most stressful times in the calendar, because there's so many demands on us to perform, to get things done. The summer's done, our innocence is behind us, and there's some of us who just love, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. Some of us who say, let's just take in the moment of the beauty right now. Some of us who say, let's get to know one another. And there's always that tension between those who want to continually build the shelter and get water, and those who want to take in the beauty of the sanctuary around us. To whatever degree you're facing stress right now as September begins, just remember this biblical story. Your first choice is just keep going. Just keep going. Let's end the sermon then with this deeply theological idea. In Christianity, it's not simply just keep going. We believe as Christians that our keeping going is accompanied by a promise by God that we will return to the garden. The story of God in Jesus Christ is a story about God saying, I know that you're no longer in the garden, but my whole will is about our getting back together again, and I'm walking with you in this world, like I was walking with you in the garden, and we're going to walk together so that we can regain Eden. Just keep going, and keep going with hope. Amen.